Jim Jones had been staying low-key for way too long. Too long for someone who's had his name dragged through the dirt by one of the loudest and most reckless mouths in hip-hop. For years, while YouTubers, bloggers, and gossip pages kept throwing his name around like bait in the 6ix9ine snitching scandal, Jim just sat back, calm, silent, and unbothered, letting the streets talk for him. But now, with new footage going viral and whispers turning into straight-up roars online, the man himself finally decided to break his silence. Not for clout, but to remind everyone why there are some things you just don't say. See, this tension between Jim Jones and Tekashi 6ix9ine ain't new. It runs deep. It goes all the way back to one of the darkest chapters in New York rap, when the 9 Trey Bloods had the whole city buzzing for all the wrong reasons. That was the era when snitches became headlines, loyalty was tested, and alliances got exposed. When 6ix9ine got snatched up by the feds, the rainbow-haired rapper started doing what he does best, talking too much. He didn't just spill the tea, he poured the whole pot, mentioning names that never should have been said out loud. And one of those names, Jim Jones. Tekashi sat in that courtroom calling Jim a retired rapper who was still active in the streets and tried to drag him into the mess tied to the 9 Trey movement, a crew already under heavy federal heat. It wasn't that Jim was on trial, it was that 6ix9ine couldn't keep his mouth shut. That moment flipped the streets upside down, because when you start name-dropping real ones tied to real situations, that's when things stop being entertainment and start being dangerous. That whole situation was straight chaos. Messy, reckless, and downright dangerous. It kicked off a chain reaction that still echoes through hip-hop today. When that infamous wiretap footage dropped, the one where Mel Murda and another 9 Trey member allegedly talked about violating 6ix9ine, disrespecting the crew, Jim Jones's name popped right back up in those transcripts, and the internet went crazy. Fans, haters, and online detectives started twisting the story, making it sound like Jim was secretly pulling strings behind the scenes, calling shots like a mob boss. But people who really understood the streets knew better. They knew Jim wasn't out here plotting or trying to hurt anyone. He was just caught in the middle of a conversation, one that prosecutors used to paint a wild picture of the street life, the same street world most rappers only pretend to understand. Then 6ix9ine got out of prison, and that's when the circus started all over again. He jumped on Instagram loud as ever, pointing fingers at Jim Jones, calling him a snitch, and claiming he somehow beat the system. He even mocked Jim's loyalty to Dipset, called him broke, and said the real gangsters are either dead or locked up. It was pure disrespect. And everyone was waiting to see if Jim would clap back. But Jim didn't take the bait. He stayed cool, calm, and silent. Not because he was scared, but because he knew arguing with a man who already worked with the feds was a losing game. For Jim, that was the line. Once you cross it, there's no going back. His silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. Fast forward to now, and karma just pulled up with full energy. A viral clip from Miami shows 6ix9ine in a heated argument at a bus stop. And let's just say, it didn't end well. Dude got shoved, humiliated, and left looking wild in front of the cameras. The footage exploded online, memes everywhere, think pieces flooding the timeline, and rappers laughing like the universe finally spun the block. For a lot of people, it felt like payback had finally arrived. Loud, public, and long overdue. For the first time in years, Jim Jones finally spoke up, and he didn't need a rant or a threat to make his point. No shouting, no drama, no messy back and forths. Just one cold, heavy statement that hit harder than 1,000 tweets ever could. He said, "The internet will never protect a man with no principles." Boom. That line shook the whole scene. It wasn't just aimed at 6ix9ine, it was aimed at everybody in this new culture that celebrates disloyalty, trolling, and fake toughness like it's something to be proud of. Jim had been sitting on the sidelines for years, watching the game change, watching younger rappers idolize 6ix9ine's energy, his wild antics, his flashy numbers, but ignoring what really mattered. The code. The same street code that built the very foundation of New York hip-hop. Jim saw how 6ix9ine mocked real legends, threw up gang signs he never earned, and disrespected men who risked their lives for loyalty and respect. He watched it all get twisted into a circus, a marketing plan, where integrity didn't matter as long as the streams kept coming in. So when Jim finally opened his mouth, he didn't need to scream or go live for attention. His words carried that quiet power that comes from knowing who you are and what you stand for. Because when you've built your name off real work and real consequences, you don't chase clout, you demand respect without saying much at all. And here's what makes it even deeper. Jim Jones ain't some washed-up old head trying to hold on to fame. He's a pillar in the game, one of the true architects of modern New York hip-hop. As one-third of Dipset, he helped shape the city's sound and swagger, bridging the raw street life with mainstream fashion and business. From Harlem blocks to high-end runways, Jim showed rappers how to move with both grit and style. So when he speaks, the culture listens because his name still holds real weight. Jim Jones has seen it all. From the crack era's raw streets to today's streaming-driven chaos, he's watched the rap game flip, twist, and evolve. And through it all, he learned one harsh truth. When the wrong people get too much power, the whole culture suffers. To Jim, 6ix9ine became the perfect example of everything that went wrong in hip-hop. The endless clout chasing, the blatant disrespect, and the total lack of accountability. Watching 6ix9ine fall apart in front of the world felt like karma doing its job. It was like the streets themselves were finally restoring balance. But behind the scenes, there was more going on than anyone realized. People close to Jim say his silence wasn't just smart, it was survival. The feds had already torn through the 9-tray circle, looking for names, connections, and any slip-up they could use. One wrong move, one heated response, and the headlines would have twisted his words into something criminal. So instead of reacting, Jim chose patience, the kind of patience that keeps you free while others crash out for attention. Meanwhile, trolls and haters online mocked him, asking, "Why didn't Jim Jones get locked up?" But Jim just laughed it off, cool as ever. He knew the truth. He was never part of that madness. He was just being dragged into somebody else's chaos. And the best revenge, staying free, focused, and unbothered. While others were busy chasing clout, Jim was stacking moves, building business, and keeping his name clean. Then came that resurfaced interview clip. The one that reminded everyone who Jim really is. In it, he broke it down plain and simple, saying, "Being real ain't about fighting or posting your problems online. It's about standing on what you say and never switching sides." That line hit like a knockout punch, another subtle shot aimed straight at 6ix9ine. Because if there's one thing the rainbow-haired rapper became known for, it's flipping sides faster than he changed hair colors. Jim didn't need to brag or flex. His actions spoke louder than words. While others burned their own credibility, he stood tall, proving that sometimes silence and discipline are the loudest power moves in the game. And the difference between Jim Jones and 6ix9ine couldn't be clearer if you drew it in bold neon letters. Jim stands for the old code, loyalty, honor, and respect. While 6ix9ine, he's the face of the new era chaos, where clout beats character and clicks mean more than credibility. It's wild how the game flipped. What's even crazier is that 6ix9ine's latest downfall didn't come from gang beefs or court cases. This time, he took himself down. Every time he tried to clown legends like Jim Jones or Meek Mill, all he really did was prove how far gone he was from the streets. That so-called bus stop drama in Miami. Just another episode showing the world how empty his hype had become. He got pressed out in public, no bodyguards, no entourage. Just him, alone, humiliated, and exposed for what he truly is when the cameras stopped rolling. The internet couldn't save him this time. Meanwhile, Jim Jones has been quietly winning. While 6ix9ine spirals in public, Jim's been focused on his bag. Touring, linking up with artists like Mineo, and stacking business ventures on the side. He's not out here chasing views or fake beefs, and that's exactly why his name still rings solid in every barbershop and studio across the country. In the eyes of the streets, Jim's credibility never wavered, not even for a second. If anything, his stock skyrocketed, because in a world full of loud talkers and fake tough guys, he stayed 10 toes down, solid and silent. And now that Jim finally spoke on the situation, even for just a moment, it feels like the story came full circle. 6ix9ine tried to expose Jim, but ended up exposing himself. Every stunt, every diss, every fake flex only reminded people who the real one was. What really shook the internet, though, was how other rappers reacted. When Jim's statement about principles went viral, the wave of support was instant. Even rappers who once defended 6ix9ine were reposting Jim's quote, saluting the message loud and clear. It was like the culture itself drew a line in the sand, one side for integrity, the other for internet clout. At the end of the day, Jim didn't have to shout to prove he's real. He just lived it, and that's why his legacy keeps shining while the noise around 6ix9ine fades into silence. It was like the whole industry suddenly woke up and realized some lines just ain't meant to be crossed. Even people who never rocked with Jim Jones had to admit he handled everything with straight-up dignity. No yelling, no clout chasing, no fake tough talk, just calm power and class. In a world where everybody's out here screaming for attention, Jim's silence became the loudest message of them all. But if you really look deeper, there's a bigger lesson hiding in this whole story. A lesson about loyalty, time, and truth. The same internet that once crowned 6ix9ine as the king of New York flipped on him the moment the smoke cleared. The same fans who used to cheer for his trolling now roast him in comment sections like he's a running joke. That's how fast fake love fades when your fame's built on lies. Meanwhile, Jim Jones stayed the same man he's always been, loyal, grounded, and respected. No gimmicks, no desperate moves, just consistency. And look where that got him. Still thriving, still relevant, still solid in a culture that eats its own. That's not luck, that's what happens when you build your legacy on real connections, not viral clicks. The streets might not trend on Twitter, but they got long memories. They don't forget who stood tall when the noise got loud. And there's something kind of poetic about how it all came full circle. 6ix9ine once mocked Jim for being too old and irrelevant, but now the tables have completely turned. Jim's name still carries respect, while 6ix9ine's has turned into a punchline, a meme, a cautionary tale. That's the ultimate difference between being legendary and being temporary. Jim earned his respect the hard way, through years of real moves and solid principles, while 6ix9ine's empire of clout crumbled the second the internet got bored. And if there's one thing the game learned from this saga, it's that authenticity always outlasts the hype. Jim Jones never had to prove a thing. His whole life already did that for him. From Dipset classics that shaped an era to bold business moves that turned him into a Harlem success story, Jim's legacy is already set in stone. Every anthem, every hustle, every stage, it all speaks louder than any internet beef ever could. And funny enough, all 6ix9ine really did was remind everyone why real ones never waste time responding to clowns. Even the younger generation of rappers is starting to catch on now. They're finally seeing that no amount of views, followers, or viral moments can buy what the streets call credibility. You can fake chains, fake cars, even fake beef, but you can't fake respect. And that's why Jim's words hit so deep when he said, "The internet don't protect a man with no principles." That wasn't just a jab at 6ix9ine. That was a warning to the whole culture. It was a message for every artist out here thinking that trolling equals talent or that disrespect equals dominance. Because eventually the truth always circles back around. And when it does, it hits hard. That's exactly what happened with the now infamous bus stop moment. The man who once bragged about being untouchable, who mocked legends, flashed money, and laughed at danger, got literally touched. And the whole world saw it happen. It wasn't just a random altercation, it was poetic justice playing out in real time. But Jim didn't need to post about it or rub it in. That's not his style. He didn't need to celebrate karma doing his work because the streets did it for him. The memes, the laughter, the energy, it all spoke for itself. When you cross real ones, you might dodge the feds, you might even escape the headlines for a minute, but you can never outrun the energy you put out. What goes around always comes around. That's just how the universe works. And Jim Jones understood that better than anyone. His response wasn't about revenge, it was about restoration. He didn't want to see 6ix9ine hurt or locked up again. That wasn't the mission. What Jim wanted was for the world to finally understand the difference between fame and respect, because fame fades fast, but respect lasts forever. And after everything that went down, it's crystal clear which one Jim still owns. When Jim finally delivered his calm but powerful message, something shifted across the whole hip-hop world. For years, people had been walking on eggshells around the 6ix9ine topic, afraid to say his name, afraid to catch heat, or worse, using his antics for clout. But Jim's one statement, smooth, direct, and fearless, cracked that silence wide open. It gave everyone else in the industry the green light to finally speak their truth. Suddenly, the walls came down and rappers started calling things what they really were. The truth spilled out like a flood, and nobody could stop it. Then came Milo, a longtime friend and ally of Jim, someone who's seen it all from the Harlem blocks to the big stages. He was one of the first to show public love, posting an old picture of the two of them together captioned, "Some things don't need to be explained." That one line said everything. It was loyalty in its purest form. No clout chasing, no drama, just quiet respect between real ones. Milo had watched the whole circus play out over the years, the trolling, the taunting, the wild disrespect that turned hip-hop into a reality show. But he also knew one thing for sure. Guys like Jim weren't ever gonna let social media rewrite the street code. To them, principles still matter. Loyalty still means something. You don't betray the code just because it's trending. And when Milo sat down for a recent podcast interview and got asked straight up about the infamous bus stop situation and Jim's reaction, he didn't hesitate for even a second. His answer was sharp, proud, and real. Because when you've stood beside real ones long enough, you don't flinch when the topic gets hot. Milo didn't hold back for a second. He looked straight at the host and said, "You can't live fake forever. Eventually, your character shows up before you do." The host laughed, but the room went quiet for a moment because everyone knew exactly what he meant. 6ix9ine had spent years hiding behind fame, bodyguards, and social media clout. But once all that was gone, the truth stood there naked and undeniable. When the lights fade and the cameras stop rolling, all that's left is who you really are. And no matter how rich or famous you get, the streets don't respect a man who betrays his own people. Ever. Then another heavyweight voice entered the conversation. Fat Joe, a true OG who's been in this game long enough to spot trouble from miles away. For years, Joe had tried to guide younger artists, dropping game they didn't always want to hear. And when it came to 6ix9ine, he saw the crash coming before anyone else did. In a throwback interview, Joe revealed, "When I first met that boy, I saw potential. But I also saw danger. I told him straight up, you playing with fire. You got the whole world watching, but the streets watching harder, and man, was he right. Because when you live off chaos, eventually that chaos circles back and eats you alive." So when Joe was recently asked about Jim Jones's new statement, his response said it all. He leaned back, smiled, and said, "Jimmy always been solid. He don't gotta explain himself to nobody. The real ones know what time it is." That moment hit different. Because when a respected legend like Fat Joe gives you that kind of validation, it carries weight. Jim's message wasn't about clout or payback, it was about respect. And when OGs like Fat Joe co-sign that energy, it reminds everyone what hip-hop used to stand for. I mean, loyalty, honor, and truth. In a scene full of fake personas and temporary fame, Jim's authenticity became the loudest voice of all.